All right, greetings, scholars. What we're going to do now is I'm going to try to do these videos about 30 minutes at a time. Maybe some will be shorter. None will be longer because my camera capacity only does 30 minutes at a time. I want to do it this way rather than live streaming because I don't know what the situations are like back home where you are. I don't know when you're going to be able to sit and watch. I don't know if you have the time. You have the timetable to be able to watch a streamed video. So this way I can do these videos. I can put them online. You can watch them, but you have to have them watched before the due date, before the exam opens. The quizzes and the exams, the due dates are all the same. So keep track of the quizzes and the exams, watch the due dates, and then take a look at the videos, watch all the videos while you're reading the textbook. Now, the next 3 short videos should be George Washington's presidency and his crises, John Adams' presidency and his crisis, and then Thomas Jefferson's presidency. These 3 presidents have a lot of things going on during their presidency that's going to establish a lot of precedents for the future of the American presidency. So we'll get started with Washington. When Washington takes office, he's almost voted in unanimously. I'm trying to see if my clicker is working, but it helps when you have the little antenna. I guess, as we say in class, it helps when you have the little antenna plugged in. Washington is now, when Washington takes office, following the war, following this restructuring, this new government under the Constitution, there is a search for stability. The United States has sort of been hobbled up to this point, and so they need some stability. There will be some sources of economic change that are going to be vitally important and are going to change sort of the shape of the country. And we're going to look at Alexander Hamilton's economic policy, his political economy of the time period, because Hamilton is going to attempt to create some kind of economic empire within the United States. And we'll talk about the conflicts in the West, the East, and the South very briefly, and some of the distinctions between the Federalists and the Republicans. Now, first thing we're going to discuss is Washington's cabinet, and then this idea about the Bill of Rights. The question of Bill of Rights hasn't been answered by the time Washington. Actually, it's one of the necessary requirements for the last 2 states, the 2 largest states, Virginia and New York, to have ratified this new Constitution, was that Virginia demanded that there be a Bill of Rights included in the Constitution. So the first order of business for the new government will be to create a Bill of Rights. In most textbooks, it'll talk about Jefferson and Washington and Adams all bemoaning the concepts of political parties. They don't call them political parties. They call them political factions. Okay? We are very comfortable with the idea of political parties. These guys did not like the idea of having political parties. They took seriously this notion, e pluribus unum, out of many one. They believed political parties within our system would be an indication of fracture and faction, and that would be bad. We had to adhere to basic principles, and these basic principles were what we were going to use to run the country. The problem is, within the scope of the basic principles as they're laid down in the Constitution, we have 2 governing philosophies that are going to emerge. We have these 2 governing philosophies, and those will be the 2 philosophies, the 2 differences between the Federalists and the Republicans. The idea that, one, the Federalist has this strong, powerful, monolithic central government that is in control of things from the top down, whereas the Republican has this idea that the authority of the government is spread out amongst the people, amongst the state governments. So you have a national government and you have this federal system. National government with powerful state governments, with local governments and things like that. So the idea of political parties were repellent to these guys. These guys didn't appreciate it. As a matter of fact, if you want to read something about it, James Madison refers to them as the special interest. Each of these factions is what he calls representative of his special interest. And his Federalist paper number 10 is extremely enlightening as regard to what he means by these special interests and how the central government is supposed to balance the needs of the special interests, these differing philosophies. Now, Washington, even though they declare that we have a partyless system, that we are all one and united in ideology, Washington recognizes that there are two governing philosophies. And we can see this in the selection of the individuals that he puts in his cabinet. Now, he creates this cabinet. It's not something that's mandated by the Constitution, but Washington is a meticulous organizer. And so George Washington is going to have this cabinet system of individuals who today we call them secretaries, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, right? We call them secretaries. I guess in Europe they would have been called ministers, foreign ministers, Minister of State, Prime Minister, things like that. Washington is going to choose a group of people to be in his cabinet who are very diverse. Now, the next time that you'll have a president who selects a cabinet this diverse will be when FDR comes to power during the Great Depression. FDR won't care what political party. But between George Washington and FDR, everybody is partisan straight down the line. If you're a Republican-minded individual, your cabinet is Republican. If you're a Federalist-minded individual, your cabinet will be Federalist. Washington is the one who tried to be above this kind of politics. Okay? For the Department of War, he's going to appoint Henry Knox. Henry Knox was a Federalist. For the Department of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton is one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, along with Madison and John Jay. So he's going to appoint Alexander Hamilton to be the Treasury Department. Thomas Jefferson is going to be appointed Secretary of State. Now, when the Constitution is written, Thomas Jefferson is serving as ambassador to France. So he's in France during this time period, and when the Constitution is ratified, they contact Jefferson and tell him to come back from France because Washington wants to appoint him as a Secretary of State. The idea that Thomas Jefferson has all of these foreign connections makes him ideally suited for this position as Secretary of State. Jefferson, even though he wasn't here during this period, would have been one of the anti-federalists. One of the people who believed in the stronger state governments as opposed to the stronger central federal government. For the Attorney General, he will select Edmund Randolph. Edmund Randolph will serve as Attorney General. He also is an anti-federalist. I believe it's Randolph and Patrick Henry who are going to be the primary authors of what are referred to as the Anti-Federalist Papers. If any of you are studying political science and you are given the assignment to discuss the Federalist Papers, you should read them side by side with a collection of responses called the Anti-Federalist Papers, because that's where the give and take, that's where the dialogue between these two positions takes place in the New York newspapers. And then for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay will be the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He also is a Federalist. He meets with these guys regularly. Washington basically took his responsibilities from the Constitution and he placed individuals over each part of the federal branch. Each part of the federal branch that Washington was responsible for, he put individuals he felt were the best capable of doing the jobs. That way they can answer to him and he can still be the leader. Washington was a meticulous organizer. He meets with these guys regularly. It establishes a precedence because every president following this is going to establish a cabinet and have these regular cabinet meetings. Now, John Adams who came in second in the election where George Washington was elected unanimously as president, John Adams becomes vice president. He's not happy. He's not happy. We know this because of the letters he writes home to his wife, Abigail. He doesn't get invited to meet with the president and his cabinet. Well, because the Constitution, the vice president has a job. Can any of you remember from your reading of the Constitution what the job of the vice president is? I can't hear anybody. Nobody's answering. It's like they haven't read the Constitution. Isaac, do you know what the job of the vice president is? I'm talking to my son. You know what his job is? No? You don't know what his job is?
It's a high five the president.
High five the president. That sounds like it's a good one. Today, in modern times, the vice president almost serves as a second secretary of state. We send him to overseas. We give him important tasks. We do things. But in the Constitution, the purpose of the vice president is to preside over the Senate. He holds the hammer when the Senate meets. He's supposed to be the one who sits in the big chair and governs the meeting of the Senate. The only time he works is when there's a tie, and the vice president breaks the tie. Adams was pretty upset about being relegated to this position because, after all, he's been involved in this thing since before the Declaration of Independence, and now he has to sit there and babysit these arguing bunch of babies. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like it, and he lets Abigail know that he's a little disenchanted with the position. But this is Washington's cabinet. Again, this is new. Now, the Bill of Rights. Before Virginia and New York would sign the Constitution, before they would ratify the Constitution, they wanted guarantees that certain rights would never be infringed upon. Okay. This is part of this idea about the question about how many rights does the Constitution give us. A lot of people said, oh, it gives us 8 rights. Oh, it gives us 10 rights. The Constitution doesn't give us any rights. The Constitution gives us no rights. What the Constitution gives us are guarantees that the government will never infringe upon the rights that we hold naturally. Now, some people are going to think that's semantics, but be aware that it's not. Because this is the thing. If a government is powerful enough to give you rights, then a government is powerful enough to take your rights away. That's what the Founding Fathers believed. That's what they were talking about when, in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Amongst these, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The basic idea that rights are held by men naturally, and the government's job is supposed to protect those rights. The government's job is supposed to protect those rights. So these Bill of Rights, even though they give us 8 spelled out rights that the American people hold together, it doesn't mean that's the only rights, because that's what the 9th Amendment says. It says just because a right isn't spelled out here specifically doesn't mean that you don't hold those rights. And then the 10th Amendment, which is probably the most ignored amendment in the entire Constitution, says that the federal government will not take upon itself any responsibilities not directly given to it by the Constitution. The idea is that the Founding Fathers believed that the government is something artificial. Government is something intrusive. Government is something that needs to be controlled. Right? Men have rights naturally. The reason the first 8 of these of the First Amendments or of the amendments are written out is because those are the rights that we had problems with in the past. The freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to keep and bear arms. All of these rights had been infringed upon by the British government. So when this Constitution is written up, the idea is we want guarantees, and these amendments were guarantees. They're like double insurance that these rights won't be infringed upon. Okay? So once the Bill of Rights is written up, the Bill of Rights is ratified by the Congress, and then it's ratified by the states. It becomes part of the Constitution. Now, I want to jump forward here and talk about agriculture. Okay? At this point, self-sufficiency farming is not going to be enough. The people in the colonies, they like their luxuries. Okay? England has held us back. England has held us back. The idea is what we started with is this, we were sort of the agrarian stockpile for England. We would harvest all the resources here in the New World, and we would ship it back to England to be manufactured. And then when things were manufactured, it would be sent back to us to be sold to us as manufactured goods. This was how England maintained its global economy, right? Of having resource harvesters and mercantilists, of people who manufactured items and resold the items back to us. Okay? So what we have to do in this state, because at this point we see ourselves in this agrarian attitude, we need to make sure that we produce enough surplus so that we can purchase the kinds of things that we want to purchase. Okay? In 1793, prices are going to start to rise in the Americas simply because England and France are at war. We're getting ready to start with the French Revolution and the beginnings of the Napoleonic era. And we make a lot of money selling goods to both the English and to the French. We make a killing. And so it's going to cause prices to rise because our supply diminishes, because we're selling wheat and foodstuffs overseas. Okay? All kinds of people are making money. The shippers and millers and the coopers, the ship and wagon builders, all these guys are making lots of money. Okay? Especially the wheat farmers. Now, in the South, two kinds of cotton grow naturally. Okay? Two kinds of cotton. The first is called smooth seed cotton, and the second is called green seed cotton. Now, it's really simple. Smooth seed cotton has seeds in it that are smooth. And so you pick the ball of cotton and you rub the ball of cotton and the smooth seed falls out of it. Your cotton is cleaned. Okay? Smooth seed cotton grows really well along the coast. Okay, grows really well along the coast. Green seed cotton, which grows inland everywhere. Green seed cotton's a little different. It's a sturdier plant, but the hulls that hold the cotton ball while it's maturing is much harder, almost like tree bark. And when it pops open, it's got these little barbs, real sharp little claws. The cotton itself has seeds in it, but these seeds have little hooks and attach itself to the cotton. It's like whenever you've walked through the woods and you've run through the briar bushes and you've got all these little seeds connected to your pants. Well, that's how this green seed cotton works. It's not easy to clean. The only way to get rid of the seeds out of the green seed cotton is to rip the cotton ball into lint so that the seeds fall out. It takes a whole day to process 1 pound of green seed cotton by hand, which is an arduous task. In 1793, a man who graduated from Yale University comes to the South with the goal of inventing a machine, developing a machine that's going to reduce labor. Some people believe that Eli Whitney had as his primary goal the idea that he could help to bring an end to the institution of slavery, being from New England, a state that's already, states that have already passed abolition. When he comes down to Georgia, he starts looking at cotton processing, And he determines that the most labor-intensive part of cotton production is this cleaning process. So Eli Whitney is going to invent a machine, right? Referred to as the cotton gin. As you can see, the cotton with the seeds and the hulls are dropped into the hopper. It passes through these paddles. These paddles break the hulls apart. See, because when you pick the cotton, you can put your fingers into the hull and pull it out, but those little barbs will rip the dickens out of your fingers. So it's much easier to just snap the whole hull off and throw it in your bag. Everything gets dumped into this hopper, and the paddles break those holes off, and they fall through a grate into a trash, into the collection receptacle. Then the cotton is pushed against this metal mesh that has saw blades protruding through it. The saw blades cut the cotton to pieces, and the cotton is able to go through the mesh, the lint, but the seeds are too large to go through, and they fall into a collection plate. The lint is then gone through the process, it's collected and then wound up, and then all of the cotton is processed. Eli Whitney's machine was, it's actually an improvement on a much older machine which never really functioned properly. Eli Whitney got it working properly. Now, with Eli Whitney's machine, you can process 50 pounds of cotton a day. 50 pounds a day. English textile mills need raw cotton. They're building sails and uniforms and all kinds of things. So in 1792, the year before the cotton gin, 1792, the South exported 138,000 pounds of cotton that year. The year after the advent of the cotton gin, 1794, the South exports 1.6 million pounds of cotton to England and France that year. And by 1800, they are shipping 35 million pounds of cotton to England and France. And by the time we get to 1860, that has increased exponentially, because as our country spreads out all the way across to Texas, the cotton belt is created all the way across the country. And so this is going to increase exponentially every single year. Now, the big question, what did it do to the institution of slavery? Your textbook will tell you that potentially the institution of slavery was dying on the vine. It was basically dying unto itself. Wasn't cost effective. Very, very few people owned slaves, and the ones who could had to be extremely wealthy. And so they believed that slavery was getting ready to basically die on its own. But when the cotton gin was brought onto the scene, when the cotton gin made it possible to process 50 pounds of cotton. So if you can process 50 pounds of cotton, that means you've got to have 50 pounds of cotton picked so that you can process it. All it did was eliminate one of the problem issues with the cotton crop, and it created a whole nother market for slavery. Because of the value placed on cotton and how much money could be made, the institution of slavery received such a bonus, it received such a shot in the arm, that slavery is going to spread throughout the South. It will be that thing which makes the South different from the whole rest of the country. Even though very well Eli Whitney could have intended that this machine eliminate the institution, the machine did the exact opposite. The machine made the institution cost effective. You can turn it off now.